to the troops.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They take with a narrative and run with it, which is not what journalism is.
Yeah.
And that's what I've been seeing. I mean, it's just like very basic. Like, yeah, you shouldn't just latch onto an idea and try to prove it. You need to just look at the facts and come to conclusions based on those facts.
So let's talk about journalism in a larger sense, because obviously you're a journalism major at Northeastern.
School of Journalism.
School of Journalism. Do you want to like be a journalist?
I did. At one point, I really did, and I actually just today I wrote one of my assignments. They asked like there was something about like about the journalism industry and race, and they're asking basically why aren't there like a lot of black people in journalism, basically. So I basically answered that well, it's because black people are choosing careers, they're choosing better careers, because once you pass that threshold of getting into a university which is predominantly white, you aren't going to go into a industry basically that's low paying, that has a history of racism, and that when you can get the same degree, even if you do study journalism and get that journalism degree, you can go on to get a job in marketing and get paid, 25-50% more. So why would you, if we're going to assume everyone is rational, right, including black people, why would a black person want that career? Like in my experience in the classes in journalism, there are like almost no black people. But when it comes to the student-run organizations, like the student newspaper that we have, it's called the Huntington News. You can go on there, and there's a lot of black writers and black journalists, but they're not studying journalism. They're studying something that they're going to get a job in, like computer science
more lucrative.
Yeah, they're going to study they're going to get a degree in something that's like more, that makes more money afterwards. Like it just makes sense. Like it's like they're asking, like they're trying to. Obviously, there are black people in journalism, and there are. But I'm saying that like if my classes are a representative sample of who's studying journalism, they're mostly white.
Okay.
Or they're all white.
So was this something that basically the entire class has to answer, or was that something?
This was my answer. This was my answer based on he posed the question like how have in recent years how have journalists changed their sources and changed their newsrooms? I focus more on the newsroom side of it, but in general, like it's obvious. Like you go to you're like, imagine like you're disadvantaged. Let's just assume that we're gonna go with the stereotype here that you're disadvantaged and you want to make better for yourself and you're smart and you get into a college. You're in the college, you make it in, you get a good scholarship, so you don't have that much financial stress on you. What do you go into? Do you study journalism and make $50K a year, or do you study engineering and make $100K a year?
Right, exactly. Was the question when it was asked, was it insinuating that the reason that black people don't go into journalism is because
it wasn't insinuating anything. It was just based on observation. Like you go into a newsroom. I've been into real newsrooms before. It's mostly newsroom is like where all the journalists sit and discuss what they're gonna work on that week or that day or whatever. A newsroom is just where the staff writers and like the staff of the and then sometimes they'll have an analyst, like a data analyst, like these are the stories people are reading, this is our website traffic and stuff like that. Like mostly like just a crew of like the main people that run a newspaper.
Okay, so here's something I want to ask you. So as a journalist, now a lot of very successful journalists are heavily biased.
Yeah.
And that's something that's done very much so on purpose.
Yeah. Why do you think that?
I think it just gets clicks.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't describe anyone, like if someone says, "Oh, I'm not biased," I'll be like, "Yeah, you're an idiot for trying to say that you're not biased because everyone is biased. You're like, we're not computers." Because if we wanted unbiased stuff, we would have computers doing all the journalism, and we'll maybe at some point we will be doing that. But the thing is that we also use our objectivity. Like all journalism is subjective.
Yes.
Right? Why for instance, what makes the New York Times and the LA Times and the Wall Street Journal and like the Tampa Bay Times, like what's in common with all these things, all these newspapers?
They're all biased.
They're all in the West. They're all in the U.S.
They're all in the West.
There's a Western bias, right? That's why when you're studying journalism like me, you're not just reading the Western news. You're also reading the Eastern news, Middle East, Europe, South America, anything that you can get your hands on and you can read in English, basically. Like you're trying to like get different perspectives. Like I read Arab. I'm studying like the conflict in Yemen, for instance. I'm reading not just the global news sometimes. Sometimes I'm reading the local news if I can get a translation.
Right. So when you're as a journalism major, like when you're in school, are they trying to produce journalists that are biased or journalists that are unbiased?
No,
because there's a place for both.
No, they're trying. I don't know about that, but they're trying to basically teach you the fundamentals of journalism, which is in the U.S. it's AP style. It's a certain style of writing that's based on the Associated Press,
right? And
it's also how to gather news, different types of stories, how to present information in a way that's clear and concise and people will want to buy, because in the end, not people, newspapers, because the old model is you sell your stories to a newspaper by the word, or unless you're a staff writer that you just write for that newspaper.
Right.
So this is based on an old model or a model that's in the process of changing, but they don't teach us to be biased. They teach us they condition us to have the judgment of a journalist, which is kind of like knowing like what's important and what's relevant,
right?
And what constitutes like good context,
right?
What constitutes like not like omitting facts, and like
right.
basically giving people the information that they need in order to understand something and make a judgment, and not to make that judgment for them. That's important.
Okay.
When I write something, for instance, I try not to make a judgment for them. Like there's a place for normative journalism, but that's not what I try to focus on. I try to focus on like this is just how things are.
Normative journalism,
meaning how things should be. I think the pure craft of journalism is to show how things are, not how things should be, because that's for you to judge how things should be.
Well, do you think you can ever get to a point where you just are showing how things are, or do you think there's always a little sprinkle of, how things should be in there?
Perhaps there is always an element of like it's not a science, It's not like you can draw the dividing line between, like you can draw the dividing line between this is facts and these are my opinions,
right?
But you can always create. There's also things like an assertion where it's just an assumption backed up by facts.
Even the way you present facts.
Here, look at it this way. I'm not just in journalism, I'm also in academia, right? So I'm studying like stuff like international affairs. And if you're studying international affairs, they know that there's a bias, and they work with the bias, and they try to turn the bias. They try to turn the bias into a science, right? Okay. So they create different lenses to look at things. So you have, for instance, in international relations, you have the realist lens, you have a constructivist lens, you have liberal lens, you have all these different or neoliberal, you have all these different types of lenses that are ways of viewing the world and ways of understanding the world. But the thing is that they're not hiding anything, right? The point is the point is that like, yes, I'm approaching it with this lens or that lens, and that's how journalism should also be in a way. It's like you're reading the New York Times, this it's called the paper of record. But what happens when they're writing something like the what is it called? The 1619 Project, which is basically just revision of history.
Right.
They're not historians; they're journalists. The journalists are writing the first draft of history. They're not going back and commenting or writing back on history.
Right.
So there's a place for journalism, and there's a place for that kind of like 1619 Project and whatnot. But that's not like the essential like craft. I don't think like there's like you go there's, and that still exists, like you go on Reuters and like AP and all this stuff. For the most part, that's what journalism is and still is. It's
just like facts.
It's like, this is what we know, this is what we could verify.
Okay.
If there is elements of speculation, we will make sure that that they're not necessarily facts, that they're just rumors or speculation. And they also have a very, very strict process for anonymous sources. A very strict process. It's not like they can just pick anyone and to say something.
Right.
It has to be information that you can't get from anywhere else, and and if you reveal that person's identity, that will damage them physically. Right. That'll and like there's a lot of ethics and principles that goes behind it, and they're starting to become less important.
Okay.
I just want to go back to, so as you were saying before, like Archer was making like a distinction between like the like the polarizing figures, right? And then
Sure.
the actual journalists. You're studying journalism like in college, right? So you see your peers and everything. Like even though you guys are being taught to think a certain way, do you see like people in your class or people you know that are just like fighting against it? Like, no, I'm only studying this so I can become like an ex writer on some. I'm like crazy. Like
This is the thing though. You don't have to study journalism to become a journalist.
So are the people who study journalism normally like along the lines of like I just want to write the pure
I would
facts?
say
Or?
it's 50-50. It's predominantly female, and it's predominantly liberal. I mean, I go to a liberal school. You have to remember, so it's not like they're getting a bunch of conservative like Fox News people with a future in Fox News.
Yeah.
They're getting like I mentioned. I don't know if I said this while we were recording, but there's a lot of gay people at Northeastern. I don't think it's like a coincidence. I think that like it's like a known to have like a strong LGBT community, and those people end up a lot of them in the journalism program or in the media program or something.
Right,
And so
right.
and like for me, like I noticed that like a lot of like the people like when I think of it like the general like room like a room of the students in journalism, it's like I can think of like I don't really care about diversity, but it's always like it's always kids that come from a same type of background. Like
Right.
they're usually more affluent, and they can usually afford to do a job or to pursue a career that's not as secure.
Yeah.
And they have always a certain viewpoint of like looking at the world, and I think that's more of like our bias as like a culture, and like how if we're like in a college setting, like that's just a college setting.
Yeah.
But the thing is that when you're studying, like I'm always like fighting against ideas, even my own ideas, and like you always kind of have to try things that are like not like the general part of the general milieu. Like you have also like people that like you can be two types of people. You can be like the guy that or the girl that writes about the same shit all the time, like about like how bad it is to be black in the university or in Boston, or because it's a problem. You can write about it, and you can eventually you're just beating a dead horse because you want to move on to other stuff. I like variety. I wrote all different sections. I wrote about lifestyle section, campus section, city sections. I wrote a couple of articles about cannabis. Something that interests me is cannabis and the laws surrounding it and how it's regulated and all this stuff and like the community behind it. I've written like actual like journalism about it. Like you can be like, oh, you're biased, you love weed. I'm like, yeah, I love weed, but this is a real thing that's happening. Like legalization all over the country and in the world. New Jersey just did it. That's a big thing. It's a big step forward. And you gotta be able to look at it as like a member of humanity, because there's a lot of journalists that are taking extreme. They're like, oh no, I don't vote. I don't want to vote because then I'll be taking a side. Or like you don't want to publicize your vote, or you don't want to be part of a party. I understand that, but you're also a person and you're also a citizen. Yeah. So you should always like people are trying to people need to know that like journalists are humans and they have biases. And a good journalist will just try to identify that bias, and if he's full of shit, he'll tell you that he's full of shit. And if he's wrong about something, he'll be the first to admit it.
Yeah, and just because you have a bias doesn't necessarily
bias is not a bad thing.
Exactly.
Bias is not a bad thing. Like I come into a lot of like rooms, and like you can tell almost instantly what that person's bias is. And the thing is that if we're gonna already assume everyone has a bias, a journalist is just the person that doesn't show it as much, and you learn to show it less.
So you can tell someone's biased when you walk into a room.
Not necessarily, but in a like a college classroom, a lot of the time, you can look at the stickers on someone's laptop and be like, you're this and that supporter. It's.
What does this say to you?
He's an idiot.
Oh, you see, yours is very sparsely. All right, you see Pokemon. All right.
So based on that, who did I vote for?
Based on this, I really have to pee.
So
just by standing up, I feel it. Based on this. Yeah, you voted for Jill Stein.